My name is Renata Cole, and I was 38 years old the spring my family decided my husband and my son were a minor scheduling conflict. I was standing in a cemetery just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, mud soaking through my boots, cold rain coming sideways off the plains, looking down at two caskets that were never supposed to exist in the same week. My husband Marcus was in one. My son Eli, 7 years old, was in the other. Behind me sat an entire church full of people who had driven hours, left jobs early, and shown up in their work boots because they loved this family. In front of me sat the empty front pew, the one reserved for immediate family. My mother, my father, and my younger brother weren't in it. They were in Cancun. They had decided a non-refundable resort package outweighed a 7-year-old's burial. And 5 days after I put my whole world in the ground, my mother called. Not to grieve, not to say she was sorry, but to ask me for $50,000. What she said on that call is the reason I haven't spoken the word mom out loud in almost a year. And what I did about it is the reason I'm sitting here tonight. If you're new here, welcome to Silent Revenge, where we follow ordinary women pushed to the edge by toxic family, by the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally, who find their way back not through screaming matches or public meltdowns, but through something colder, quieter, and a whole lot more permanent. If you've ever dealt with narcissistic parents, a toxic sibling, or a family that only shows up when there's something in it for them, you are in exactly the right place. Get comfortable. Drop something in the comments if you've been there. And please stay through to the end because this story does not end the way you think it does. Not even close. These days I'm up before the sun, 4:15 every morning, no alarm needed because grief rewires your body whether you give it permission or not. I walk across the gravel lot behind my house in the dark, and I don't bother with the kitchen light anymore. There's nobody left inside to see it glow. The first thing I touch every morning is a cold set of keys. They warm up in my hand by the time I reach my truck. Cab always smells like diesel, old coffee, and something underneath I can't quite name. For about 20 minutes before sunrise, before the world wakes up and starts asking things of me, that smell is the only thing that still feels fully mine. I've been driving long-haul freight for almost 10 years before any of this happened. Truck stop guys used to assume the operation belonged to Marcus. They'd hand him the paperwork, ask him where he wanted the trailer parked, and Marcus would just stand there grinning, this slow, patient grin, waiting for the exact moment they figured out the woman with grease under her fingernails was the one actually running things. He thought it was the funniest joke in the world. He'd order a slice of pie at the counter and just watch it happen. I still keep his old travel mug clipped into the cup holder of my rig. I don't drink from it. I just like that it's there, riding shotgun the way he used to. Marcus had coached Eli's Pee-wee baseball team on weekends. He was the kind of man who eased off the gas at a yellow light even when the driver behind him leaned on the horn. 19 years behind the wheel, not a single ticket, not a single close call he hadn't avoided by being careful. He taught Eli the same patience. He was teaching him everything. People think grief is loud, something you hear coming from a long way off. It isn't. Mostly grief is small. It's reaching for someone in your sleep and finding nothing but cold sheets. 2 little rain boots, red ones, lined up by my back door exactly where Eli kicked them off the last time he wore them. Every single morning I tell myself I'm going to move them. Every single morning I walk right past them instead. 11 months ago I still had a family waiting for me at home. Before I can tell you how I lost them, I have to tell you what the people who share my blood decided was more important than standing at my husband's grave. It had rained for 4 days straight that March, the kind of Oklahoma rain that turns a quiet creek into a wall of brown water in under half an hour. I was 3 states away on a refrigerated produce run outside Amarillo, Texas, when my phone lit up at a fuel island. Marcus had picked Eli up early from his after-school program because the Weather Service had issued a flash flood warning for the county. He took the back county road home because the highway was already flooding at the low spots. There's a stretch out past Bell Creek where the road dips into a low water crossing, a shallow concrete passage where the creek runs underneath. On a dry day you'd never notice it. That afternoon, the water came up over the crossing while Marcus and Eli were still on it. They found the truck a quarter mile downstream, pinned against a stand of cottonwood trees 2 days later, once the water finally pulled back enough for search teams to get in. I'm not going to walk you through the rest of it. Some things don't need detail, and Eli was 7 years old, and he deserves better than to become a gruesome line in somebody's video. What I'll tell you is that I drove home non-stop, 9 hours straight, no sleep, both hands shaking, running through every if a person's mind can generate. If I hadn't taken that run, if I'd been the one driving them, if I'd ever once told Marcus how much that crossing scared me in wet weather, I made it home faster than anyone expected. I was still 9 hours too late. The very first call I made, before I could even get the words completely out of my mouth, was to my mother. Out of every person on this earth, I believed she would be the one who came running. Her first question was whether the funeral could be pushed back 2 weeks. I sat down on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear, certain I'd misheard her. She and my father had a trip already booked. Cancun, she said, flat as reading off a grocery list. 8 days with your brother Dustin and his family. We've had it on the calendar since January. I told her my husband and my son were dead. She responded in the same tone you'd use telling a coworker their report was overdue. Then my brother's wife Tasha took over the family group text, because Tasha always takes over when there's a narrative to control. She wrote that everyone was of course devastated, but the flights were non-refundable, the kids had been looking forward to this for months, and surely I wouldn't want everyone to lose the entire vacation over what she then actually typed out in writing for the whole family to read. A minor scheduling conflict. Nothing the family needs to rearrange everything for. I read that sentence 6 times. A minor scheduling conflict. My son's funeral. My mother's response, 90 seconds later, was a thumbs-up emoji and the word agreed. Not one of them asked how Eli died. Not one of them asked for Marcus's middle name so the headstone would be right. Nobody asked if I was sleeping, if I was eating, if I had anyone in that house with me besides 2 small red boots by the door. They asked which week worked better for their schedules. So I told them the burial was happening that Saturday, with them or without them, and I hung up. And I didn't call back. That was the moment I understood something cold and clear about the people who raised me. They were never going to choose me. In 38 years, they never once had. And the strange thing is, understanding that didn't break me further. Freed up my hands for what was coming. At a funeral, the front pew belongs to family. At Marcus and Eli's service, that pew sat completely empty. I sat in the second row with everyone else because the people in the second row were the ones who had actually shown up. My Uncle Walt drove 6 hours up from Shreveport and stood beside me through the entire service, one steady hand on my shoulder. Marcus's old dispatcher came straight from a job site, still in his work boots. The woman from the diner where we got pancakes on Sundays came and sat near the back. Eli's second-grade teacher came and cried harder than I did. And the whole Pee Wee baseball team Marcus coached showed up in their little navy jerseys. 8- and 9-year-old boys clumped near the side door, not quite sure what to do with their hands, just knowing they needed to be there. My parents were on a beach. My brother was on a beach. Their seats stayed empty while over 100 working people packed shoulder to shoulder to say goodbye to a truck driver and a little boy who loved dinosaurs more than anything else on this earth. I gave the eulogy myself. I told them Marcus slowed down for yellow lights. I told them Eli drew dump trucks instead of superheroes because he thought what his mama drove for a living was the coolest thing in the world. I said they were the best things I ever built and the only things I couldn't keep safe. I didn't mention the empty front pew. I didn't have to. Every person in that room could see it. Afterward, my Uncle Walt walked me to my car and said the only honest thing anyone in my family offered me that entire month. Renata, he said, they're not coming back to you. Not really. You ought to build your life around that being true. I buried my husband and my son surrounded by people who drove hours and wore their work clothes and cried in the back row. And as I stood by those 2 fresh plots, boots soaked through with mud, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. My mother's name on the screen, calling from Cancun. I let it ring out into the wet grass. I had no idea yet what she was about to ask me for. Stay with me, because by the end of this story you won't believe it either. 5 days after the burial, I finally picked up, pure exhaustion more than anything else. There was no, "How are you holding up?" No, "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Just airport noise behind her voice and my mother going straight into business mode, the way she talked about overdue invoices. "Renata," she said, "we need to discuss the money." I sat down on my kitchen floor and asked what money she meant. "The 50,000, she said, as if I should already know. Then she told me my brother Dustin's restaurant was in trouble. Bad lease, bad management, supplier debt stacking up fast, and that the family needed to pull together. When I didn't answer quickly enough, she said the sentence I will hear in my sleep until the day I die. "We can always make more money, Renata. We can't make more family." She said that to me. To the daughter whose family was freshly buried in the ground. She said it from an airport in Cancun, with sand probably still in her sandals, asking me to hand over $50,000 to bail out the same son who had been sipping a poolside drink while I picked out a child-sized casket. These are the kinds of things toxic family members say. They take the most beautiful words in the English language and twist them into a crowbar. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked across the kitchen at those 2 little red boots by the door. I thought about how a person could weaponize the word family, use it like a guilt trip on someone whose actual family had just been destroyed. I came close to laughing. Came closer to something a lot worse. Instead, I asked one quiet question. "What $50,000 do you think is yours?" There was a pause. Kind that tells you the other person has already decided what they're owed and just hasn't said it out loud yet. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was about to remind her of something she'd conveniently let herself forget. And once you hear what that something was, you'll understand exactly why I never wrote that check. Keep watching. This is where it starts to turn. Here's where that $50,000 actually came from. 3.5 years before any of this, I'd wanted to stop hauling freight for other companies and buy my own rig outright. A decent used tractor ran about $95,000. I'd saved most of it myself, dollar by dollar over years, but I was still short. Marcus and I needed a bank loan to close the gap. The loan officer looked at my down payment and asked where $50,000 of it had come from. That's exactly what lenders are required to ask. That money had come from my parents, handed to me at a Thanksgiving dinner 3.5 years earlier, in front of my brother and everyone else, while they were feeling generous and proud of themselves. They called it a gift toward my future. I didn't think twice about it. The bank, however, doesn't just take your word. When part of a down payment comes from a relative, the lender requires that relative to sign a gift letter, a real legal document stating plainly that the money is a true gift, that no repayment is ever expected, and that it was never a loan in any form. I drove that paperwork to my parents' house myself. I sat at their kitchen table and I watched both of them sign their names to it. Then I filed it away with my loan documents and forgot it existed. The way you forget a fire extinguisher in your hallway, until the day you suddenly need it more than anything you own. My mother had forgotten about that letter. Or she'd decided it didn't count anymore. 'Cause now, with Dustin's restaurant sinking and my entire life freshly in the ground, she had quietly reclassified that $50,000 in her head. It wasn't a gift anymore. It was an investment, and investments in her mind were something a family could demand back whenever it became convenient. She had no idea that letter was sitting in my filing cabinet at home, signed in both their handwritings, waiting. My brother Dustin called the next afternoon to finish what our mother had started. Dustin is 31, and he'd spent his whole adult life as the promising one, which mostly meant our parents kept bankrolling him. He'd opened a barbecue restaurant 2 years earlier with money he didn't have, and now the bills were stacking faster than the dining room could cover them. He didn't ask about Eli. He went straight for the restaurant, then family obligations, then the line that told me everything I needed to know about how he saw me now. "Look, Renata," he said. "You're alone now anyway. What do you even need all that money for? You're alone now. as if my husband and my son were a line item he'd helpfully zeroed out of my budget, as if grief came with a refund. I let that sit a long moment, then I said nothing at all. Then Tasha texted, because Tasha cannot let a silence go unfilled. She wrote that family money was a shared pool, that I'd taken from the pool once already, and that now it was someone else's turn, and that frankly my attitude was hurting everyone. A shared pool. I had paid my parents back 100 different ways over the years, time, presents, every holiday, every favor, but you cannot repay people who keep quietly moving where the line is drawn. The worst part wasn't even being asked for the money. It was hearing secondhand through a cousin what story they'd already started telling, that poor Dustin was struggling to keep his dream alive and selfish Renata, sitting comfortably on her trucks, wouldn't lift a finger for her own blood. They'd built the narrative before I'd even said no. They just needed me standing there to play the villain in it. If you've ever had a narcissistic family member flip the script and make themselves the victim the moment you pushed back, drop a comment. Because what came next made that look like child's play. I want to tell you I never once wavered. That would be a lie. There's a thing I do, a thing a lot of you probably do too, where I'd rather carry the entire weight myself than watch someone else be uncomfortable. I'd been the one everyone leaned on since I was around 10 years old, packing Dustin's school lunches because our mother was always too tired. 30 years of being the strong one doesn't just switch off. So one night, about a week into the calls and the texts and the guilt campaigns, I actually sat down at my kitchen table with my checkbook open in front of me. $50,000 would have wiped out my entire financial safety net. But it would have made the phone stop ringing. And some exhausted, hollowed-out part of me just wanted the noise to end, whatever the cost. That's when my Uncle Walt caught me at it. He'd taken to stopping by most evenings, fixing things around the house that didn't really need fixing, sitting in Marcus's old recliner just to keep it from feeling so empty. He saw that checkbook lying open on the table and he didn't raise his voice. He just said real quiet, "You'd actually write that check, wouldn't you? You'd pay them to keep skipping your son's funeral." I put the pen down. 'Cause he was right. I wasn't afraid of being called ungrateful by people who hadn't shown up. I was just so deep in the habit of being the fixer that I'd almost fixed the entirely wrong problem. If you've ever been the person your whole family leans on and not a single one of them was there to catch you when you were the one falling, hit the like button right now. 'Cause this is the exact moment everything changed for me. This is where I stopped carrying people who couldn't even be bothered to stand at my son's grave. And what I did instead of writing that check is the entire reason I'm sitting here telling you this story. I capped the pen. I closed the checkbook. And the next morning at 4:15 in the dark, I did the one thing that has never once let me down in my entire life. I went back to work. Going back to work meant facing down every man in the freight industry who assumed I'd fall apart without Marcus behind me. My loan officer asked, in a voice somehow worse than outright rudeness, whether I'd considered selling the equipment while it still held its value. A freight broker I'd worked with for 6 years suddenly had concerns about whether my operation could keep running. A grieving widow with 2 trucks and her late husband's name still on half the paperwork, they'd counted me out before I'd even unlocked the cab that first morning back. My keys were cold every morning, and on some of those mornings that cold was the only thing keeping me upright. That's when Sandra found me. Sandra is somewhere north of 60, ran dispatch for a regional carrier out of Fort Worth for nearly 30 years, and has forgotten more about the freight business than most brokers will ever learn. She tracked me down at a truck stop, bought me a plate of eggs I didn't think I had the appetite for, and gave me the only piece of advice that's mattered since. "Honey," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "people are either working with you or working against you. There's no third chair at this table. Stop waiting for the doubters to come around. Make them irrelevant instead." So that's what I did. I called every shipper who'd ever trusted Marcus and me and told them the plain truth. The owner was the same woman with grease under her fingernails she'd always been, and she was still showing up on time. I didn't undercut a single other carrier. I just outworked all of them. 3 weeks in, a contract landed on my desk too big for 2 trucks alone. A regional grocery distributor, steady weekly freight, the kind of account that builds a company instead of just keeping it breathing. To take that contract, I needed a second tractor on the road fast, which meant I needed to sell Marcus's rig. That truck had been his pride. Oil changes logged to the exact day, every run recorded in his careful handwriting. And on the dashboard, a little plastic dinosaur Eli had glued there. "So Daddy has a friend for the long hauls," Eli used to say. I sat in that cab for almost an hour before I could touch anything. I pulled out his sunglasses, a church bulletin, a roll of quarters for the air pump, and tucked in the door pocket, under a folded road atlas, his old paper logbook. Not the electronic kind the regulations require now, the paper one he'd kept out of pure habit, the way some men refuse to let go of a routine that served them well. 19 years of his life recorded in pencil. Every run, every mile in that blocky handwriting. I held it and couldn't make myself open it. Felt like trying to open his hands. But as I picked it up, I caught a glimpse of the very last page. It wasn't a logged run. It was writing, longer than any single entry, and it had been there the entire time I'd been grieving, 2 feet away from me, waiting. Took me 3 days to open it. The last page was dated exactly 1 week before the accident. The top, in his plain, direct handwriting, was a title, the same way he titled everything in his life, no frills, no poetry. Things we're going to do. Buy our own second rig, paid off, no bank involved this time. Get our own name on the door, not somebody else's. And then the line that knocked the floor out from under me. Cole and Son. So Eli grows up knowing his mama built something real with her own 2 hands. He'd already chosen the name. For the boy who drew dump trucks instead of superheroes. So Eli would grow up watching his mother run something with their name on the door. Cole and Son. I reached up to the visor where Marcus always clipped Eli's drawings. The one that had been riding there almost 2 years. 3 lumpy crayon dump trucks in a row, a stick figure with brown hair standing beside them, and underneath in crooked kindergarten letters, Mama's Trucks. I'd driven past that drawing 100 times and never truly seen what it was. My brother had said, "You're alone now, what do you even need the money for?" They'd called my son's funeral a minor scheduling conflict. They'd tried to strip $50,000 out of my grief. I was about to make that little boy's name worth more than their entire vacation combined. I didn't decide what came next in anger. I decided it the way you take a long, steep grade in a lower gear, both eyes open, steady all the way down. That week, I filed the paperwork. Company stopped being Renata Cole, owner-operator. Became Cole and Son Freight. I kept the son in there. He was gone, and I kept it anyway. 'Cause some names you earn through loving somebody, not by managing to keep them here. I took on the grocery contract. Bought the second tractor outright. When the freight kept coming steady, I leased a third. I had real drivers now, including a sharp young woman named Priya who'd left a bigger carrier specifically because I paid fair and kept my word. We repainted every truck deep forest green, the company name in clean white block letters down both doors. And underneath, small enough that you'd only notice if you looked close, I had them trace Eli's 3 lumpy crayon dump trucks exactly from his drawing onto every door. The first morning I saw all 3 rigs lined up in the yard with his artwork on every door. I sat in my truck a long while before I trusted myself to drive. The broker who doubted I'd survive the season called asking for spare capacity. The loan officer who'd suggested I sell quietly bumped up my credit line without being asked. Funny how fast "she'll never make it" turns into "we always believed in her" once the invoices come in clean. I didn't gloat. I just quietly remembered every name. There's something nobody tells you about building something after you've lost everything. The grief doesn't go away while you're doing it. It rides right along with you, same as always. But it starts to take up less of the seat. The building doesn't fix the losing. Nothing fixes the losing. What building does is give your hands something to do that matters, so the grief doesn't get to be the only thing you are. Some mornings I still pulled over in the cab and just sat there, unable to see the road. Some mornings those 3 lumpy dump trucks on my own door were the only reason I put the truck back in gear. I am telling you all of this because I want you to understand that what came next at that anniversary party wasn't about being strong. It was about being so tired of being lied about that I finally ran out of reasons not to do something about it. Word traveled back to my family the way it always does in tight-knit communities, fast and already twisted. The daughter, who was alone now and supposedly desperate, was running a real company with her dead son's name on the door and 3 trucks rolling interstate freight. They could smell the success from a mile off. The same people who'd skipped the funeral started liking my posts online. My mother even sent a text, the first genuinely warm message she'd sent in months. "We're so proud of what you've built, honey." The same thing they'd tried to extract $50,000 from just weeks earlier. I didn't respond. But going no contact wasn't going to be that simple, because Tasha doesn't let stories die. Tasha treats family dynamics the way some people run a marketing campaign, relentless, never letting a single day go quiet. Texts came daily. Guilt wrapped in concern. She forwarded a photo of Dustin's kids at the restaurant, captioned with a line about how they might lose their home, as if a mortgage and my dead son belonged anywhere near the same sentence. She worked the extended family hard. My cousin Marisol called to tell me exactly what was circulating, that I'd come into money and turned my back on the people who raised me, that grief had made me cold and bitter, that my parents were heartbroken over how distant I'd become. The same parents who had been floating in a resort pool while I chose a child-sized casket. They had flipped the entire narrative. In their version, they were the wounded party. I was the villain who wouldn't lift a finger for her struggling brother. For about one day, hearing that made me sick, because a lie told by enough mouths starts to feel like weather, something you just have to live under. Then it made everything go very clear. They weren't going to stop on their own. People who rewrite history to make themselves the victim never voluntarily put the pen down. And estrangement from people like this doesn't happen cleanly. It happens in waves, each one meant to pull you back under. Marisol, to her real credit, wasn't buying any of it. "I was at that funeral, Ren," she told me. "I saw that empty front pew with my own 2 eyes. I'm not going to start misremembering what I saw." That was the first crack in their story. One person in that family who'd been in the same room as the truth and refused to let go of it. I filed her away, next to that gift letter in my filing cabinet, in a growing mental folder of things that were going to matter very soon. The thing about a smear campaign run by a narcissistic family is that it moves the same way wildfire moves, fast, low, and it finds every gap you've left unguarded. My mother had been my entire social introduction to that community for 38 years. She'd built a version of me in people's minds long before I'd had the chance to show up and be anything else. So her telling that community that I'd become cold and selfish and money-obsessed landed in soil that was already prepared for it. People who had never once witnessed anything between us and I would nod along over coffee and agree that grief changes a person, and not always for the better. That's how estrangement gets spun by the people who caused it. They position it as something that happened to them, as if the person who went no contact just woke up one day and decided to be cruel for no reason. I had learned by that point to let most of it go. Not because it didn't hurt, it did in the way dull and persistent things hurt, like a bruise you keep finding in the dark. But because I'd started to understand that my energy was a resource and I was done spending it on people who treated it as a landfill. Every hour I spent being upset about what they were saying was an hour that wasn't going into coal and sun freight. Eli's name was on those trucks. I wasn't about to let the people who skipped his funeral take that from me, too. Then Marisol called on a Thursday evening with her voice dropped low, the voice people use when they're telling you something they probably shouldn't. "They're planning something," she said. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was coming up. A big celebration at the community hall, the entire extended family invited. I hadn't planned on going. But Marisol had been sitting at my aunt's kitchen table when my mother and Tasha mapped the whole thing out. My father was going to stand up during the toasts and make a public appeal, frame me as the prodigal daughter who'd turned her back on her own blood in their time of need. They figured I'd either break down under the pressure of 40 relatives watching me, or refuse and prove exactly how cold I'd become. Either exit led exactly where they wanted. Trap with 2 exits, both leading straight into their story. Marisol thought I should stay home. Don't give them a stage. For one quiet minute, that's exactly what I planned to do. Then something in me went very still, the same way it goes when you're hauling a full load down a steep mountain grade and the brakes start to fade. You stop being scared and you just start driving. They wanted an audience of 40 people in one room, ready to watch me be put back in my place. But an audience works both ways. They were building themselves a stage to humiliate me. So I started thinking seriously about what else a person could do with that exact same stage, that same room of witnesses, and a truth nobody in it had bothered to actually check. I drove out to the lake the week before the party. Not the crossing, I will never go back to that place, but the lake upstream where Marcus used to take Eli on Sunday mornings to skip flat stones while I caught up on sleep at home. I went right at dawn, when the water goes flat and silver and the whole world seems to hold its breath alongside you. I'd been avoiding that lake the way you avoid pressing on a sore tooth, certain that standing there again would crack me in half. It didn't. I sat on the bank with a fresh cup of coffee and talked to them a long while. I told Eli about the trucks with his artwork on the doors, how the drivers at the truck stops always asked about the little crayon drawings, and how I got to say his name every single time. I told Marcus I'd named the company exactly the way he'd written it in that logbook. I told them what I was planning at the anniversary party, and I asked out loud, alone on that quiet bank, whether I was doing it for the right reasons. I sat with that question for a while. Grief teaches you things about yourself that nothing else will. Teaches you which of your instincts are healthy and which ones are just old wounds pretending to be wisdom. I had spent most of my life managing other people's discomfort at the expense of my own. I had packed my brother's lunches. I had shown up to every holiday. I had wired money for emergencies and driven across state lines to help and never once kept a ledger, because that's not why you do those things. You do them because you love the people and you're trying to hold something together. Problem is that when one side stops holding and the other side keeps going, you're not building anything anymore. You're just carrying dead weight until your arms give out. What I got back wasn't anger. It was something much simpler. I didn't want my parents financially ruined. I didn't want Dustin's children losing their home. I'm not built to enjoy watching other people fall apart, even people who had hurt me this badly. What I wanted was one thing only. I wanted the truth on the record. I wanted 40 people to know exactly what had happened, so that the next time my mother called my son's funeral a minor inconvenience, there would be a room full of people who knew better. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to stop being optional. For families like mine, those two things end up feeling exactly the same. The water stayed flat and silver. For the first time in 11 months, standing on that bank didn't break me. Set me level. Now, the gift letter. I needed the certified version, not my personal copy. That meant calling my bank and requesting a certified copy from my closed loan file. The loan officer who pulled it was younger than the man who'd handled my original closing, but he found the page without any trouble. He slid it across the desk toward me. My mother's signature. My father's signature. Side by side. Above the exact language banks use, so there's never any ambiguity. The funds represent a true gift. No repayment is expected or implied. This is not a loan in any form. I had him print a certified copy, stamped and dated, and drove it home flat on the passenger seat like it might blow away. The whole drive, I kept hearing my brother's voice. You're alone now. What do you even need it for? I knew exactly what I needed that page for. Not to collect the money. I never wanted to collect a single dollar. I needed it to show 40 people in black and white who had been telling the truth. I put the certified copy in a plain folder, set it by my front door next to my keys, and I waited for Saturday. The night before the party, my Uncle Walt came by. He offered to stand with me in the room, back up, he said, in case they all came at me at once. A good and loving offer. I told him no. Not because I didn't want him there. Because I finally understood I didn't need a shield. A shield is for someone walking in expecting to lose. I wasn't walking in to lose anything. Walt, I told him, if I walk in there with backup, it looks like I'm starting a fight. I'm not going in there to fight anybody. I'm going to tell 40 people one true thing and then walk right back out. He looked at me a long moment, then nodded. The same steady nod he'd given me at the funeral, a man who knows exactly when to hold the fence post steady and when to let it stand on its own. Your father never had your backbone, he said quietly. Neither did your brother. I laid my clothes out. Plain, dark, nothing that said I was trying to impress anyone. Tucked the certified gift letter into my coat pocket, one folded page. Set the coat by the door next to my keys. 40 years of marriage. $50,000 they thought they were owed. And I was bringing exactly one piece of paper to that party. I slept better that night than I had since the funeral. When you know with total certainty what you're about to do, fear has nowhere left to live. Community hall smelled like fresh coffee, carnations, and 4 decades of potluck dinners baked into the walls. They'd gone all out, a long table draped in white cloth, a sheet cake printed with my parents' wedding photo in sugar icing, a gold banner reading 40 years. About 40 relatives had filled the room, which I noted with a certain grim amusement on the drive-in. 40 years. $50,000. 40 witnesses. My mother spotted me the moment I walked in. Her face did something complicated, surprise and triumph at once because she hadn't been certain I'd show up. Now that I had, she clearly believed I'd walked straight into her trap. Tasha air-kissed both my cheeks. Dustin wouldn't meet my eyes. Somebody pressed a paper plate of cake into my hands and I waited because I already knew exactly what was coming. There is a strange, specific calm that settles over you when you're the only person in the room who knows how the script ends. They got through the toasts first. Then my father, Russell, stood, tapped his fork against his glass, and the room fell quiet for him out of pure habit. I watched him decide, right there in front of everyone, to actually go through with it. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about family, about loyalty, about sticking together through hard times. Then, slow and deliberate, he turned to face me directly. Some of us, he said, have been blessed and have apparently forgotten where that blessing came from. We helped Renata when she had nothing, $50,000, and now that she's doing well, she won't lift a finger for her own brother. A low murmur moved through the room. Right on cue, Tasha added her line, sweet as poisoned honey, loud enough for the back row. It really is a shame. We even rearranged our plans around that funeral, and this is the thanks we get. The room turned to look at me. My mother sat with her hands folded, certain she'd already won. I set down my paper plate and stood up. I didn't raise my voice. That's the first thing I need you to understand because it's the thing that mattered most. 40 people were braced for a screaming match. I gave them quiet instead. And quiet in a loud room turns out to be the loudest thing there is. Dad, I said, you're right that you gave me $50,000. Let's talk about that. But first, since Tasha brought up the funeral, let's start there. I reached into my coat and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A printed timeline. Plain dates. I laid it flat on the white tablecloth, right next to the wedding cake. This, I said, pointing, is the date my husband and my son were buried. I moved my finger 1 inch to the right. And this is the date stamped on the beach photo Mom posted the following morning. Lays, cocktails, making memories that last, that was the caption. I looked up at the whole room. You didn't miss the funeral because of family. You skipped your own grandson's burial for a resort vacation, then flew home and asked the grieving mother for $50,000. The hall went completely still. My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother's certainty drained right out of her face. Then Dustin did exactly what loud people always do the moment the quiet one won't flinch. He came up out of his chair, red-faced, shouting that I was twisting everything, that the restaurant was genuinely failing, that I owed this family, that I was selfish and cold and alone. the full script delivered at maximum volume. He said I'd always thought I was better than everyone else. He said a lot of things. Loud people usually do when the quiet person won't flinch. Let them. Noise is just noise. Paper is paper. I let him finish completely. When he ran out of breath, I reached into my coat one more time and laid the second page on the tablecloth, the certified copy, stamped, dated, official, and slid it gently across toward my father. You both signed this, I said, 3.5 years ago at your own kitchen table. It's the gift letter the bank required when I purchased my first rig. States in your own signatures that the $50,000 was a gift. No repayment expected. Not a loan in any form. I let that land. You can ask me for help the way any person can ask another person for help. What you cannot do is bill me for a gift you swore under your own hand was never a debt. Then I said the 3 things I'd actually driven there to say. To Tasha, you taught me exactly which events in this family are worth attending. I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life. To my mother, now completely pale, you told me we can't make more family. You were right. So I've stopped trying to make one out of you. To Dustin, fists half open at his sides, you asked what I even needed that money for. I needed it to bury my son. You needed Cancun. Nobody spoke. Then a chair scraped at the back of the hall and Marisol stood up. Clear as a bell, she said, her voice carrying across the whole room. I was at that funeral. Everything she just said is true. I've got the dates myself if anyone needs to see them. After Marisol spoke, the room turned the way a fully loaded semi turns on a tight corner, slow at first, then all at once. An aunt I'd barely spoken to in years reached over and slid that gift letter to the center of the table so more people could read it for themselves. Relatives who'd walked in ready to judge the cold, ungrateful daughter were now staring at a printed timeline, 2 signatures, and a beach photo timestamp, doing the only honest thing left, looking ashamed of what they'd let themselves believe. My mother said my name once. Renata. Like a question. Like some part of her still believed there was a version of this evening where I sat back down and we had cake together. There wasn't. Dustin finally ran out of steam and just stood there, breathing hard. For one brief second, I saw the real thing underneath all that entitlement. He was terrified. He was genuinely about to lose the restaurant, maybe the house, and his kids were going to feel all of it. He'd gambled the whole family's goodwill on bullying me into covering his losses, and now the room was looking straight at him instead of at me. Ren, he said, quiet for the first time. I'm scared. I believed him completely. And I felt the old reflex twitch, the one that had been packing his school lunches since we were kids. But he still hadn't said the one thing that actually mattered. Not once. Not Eli's name. Not that day, not ever. Scared for himself. Never once sorry for me. So I picked up both pages, folded them back into my coat, and said the truest thing I had left. I hope you figure it out, Dustin. I really do. But you're going to have to do it without me this time. I turned and walked out into the parking lot. The night air was clean and cold, and I could finally breathe again. The story that I owed my family $50,000 died in that hall that night and never came back. You cannot collect on a gift the giver swore in writing in front of a bank was a gift. Relatives who'd been preparing to chip in toward Dustin's debt closed their checkbooks fast once they'd done the math themselves. The restaurant folded that fall. I heard about it the way I hear about all of them now, secondhand, through Marisol, with no particular feeling rising up one way or the other. I went no contact with my parents and my brother. Not through a dramatic letter, not through a final blow-up. I simply stopped picking up, and after a while they stopped calling. Quiet that settled behind them was the most peaceful thing I had felt in years. Going no contact isn't a punishment, it's just the moment you finally stop auditioning for a role in someone else's story. It's the moment you decide that the energy you've been pouring into a relationship that drains you could go somewhere that actually grows. It takes a long time for some of us to get there. That's okay. You get there when you get there. But when you do, you'll know it by the quiet. I kept the people who actually showed up. Walt comes by for Sunday dinner most weeks and sits in Marcus's old recliner, and I've made my peace with that because somebody good ought to be sitting in it. Marisol and I talk every week without fail. Sandra is semi-retired but still picks up whenever I call with a freight question I can't work through on my own. These are the people I built my life around, not because they share my blood but because they showed up when there was absolutely nothing in it for them. That's the only definition of family that's ever meant anything real to me. Cole and Son Freight runs 5 trucks now. Every one painted deep forest green. Everyone carrying Eli's 3 lumpy crayon dump trucks near the bottom corner of the door, small enough that you'd only notice if you looked, but drivers notice anyway. They ask about it at truck stops, at fuel islands, at way stations. And I get to say his name out loud every single time. Eli. My son. He drew that himself. His name rides down every interstate Marcus and I ever hauled freight across together. For as long as I keep this company running, it keeps going. That was always what Marcus wanted. Not revenge, not settlement, not the last word. He just wanted his son to grow up knowing his mama built something real. We built it. Eli's just riding along, same as always. I finally moved those 2 little red boots, not far, just onto a shelf where I can see them every morning and still make it out the door by 4:15 without breaking down. And on a quiet Sunday this past spring, almost a year out from everything, I drove back to that lake at dawn with a handful of wildflowers, the water flat and silver, not a breath of wind anywhere. I left those flowers on the bank for the 2 people who built me into who I am. The water didn't break me that time. It just held still the way it always does out there and held me steady right along with it. I don't reach for my phone much at that lake anymore. There's nobody left on the other end that I'm waiting to hear from. I've got the people who showed up when there was nothing in it for them. And I've let go, for good, of the ones who only ever appeared the moment there was something to gain. That's the whole trick to it. That's really the entire thing. Family was never about who shares your blood. It's about who shows up when there's nothing left to gain by showing up. And the ones who walk straight out the door the second there's something in it for them instead? Let them walk. And when you're ready, let yourself walk too. That's my story. A funeral they called a minor inconvenience. A vacation they refused to cancel. And 1 single page they both signed and then conveniently let themselves forget. If somebody in your life is demanding you repay a debt you never actually agreed to carry, whether that's money, loyalty, or just the endless emotional labor of managing their feelings about your pain, let this be the sign you've been waiting for to put it down. You don't owe anyone a debt you never signed for in the first place. And you are allowed to build something beautiful out of what they left behind. If this story hit close to home tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I mean that, not as a catchphrase, but because there is somebody in your life right now who is sitting at a kitchen table with a checkbook open, about to pay people who skipped their hardest day. Send this to them. Tell them to wait. Drop a comment and tell me who showed up for you when it counted, because those are the people worth naming out loud. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and hit the bell. I've got a lot more to tell you, and every single one of them ends the same way this one did, with the truth winning, quiet and clean, right on time.